Tim Mahoney, who came out with the first episode of Patterns of Evidence, is here with us, and he is going to be laying out a new movie, not just the Red Sea Crossing, but the Red Sea Miracle. Tim, it is good to have you here with us, and I am so happy that we are interrupting this series right now because this brings us full circle. We really both met in Minnesota. A lot of my ministry in the beginning of the Red Sea Crossing, in my proclamation to the world, began there in Minnesota itself. So now it's been, what has it been, 20 years now that you got started on this adventure?
Yes, it's been about 20 years, and it's been a long journey. In fact, I thought it was just a one-year project, Michael. I didn't have any clue that it would take 20 years to get, back to this point of actually investigating the Red Sea.
This, the Patterns of Evidence, the first movie that you came out with, Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus, you really, in this was where you gave all of the different viewpoints equal access. You gave the naysayers and you gave the biblical background on this. What compelled you to do this to begin with?
That's a great question. I was actually focused on, as you were, when you hear about claims that there's, chariot wheels and all that, I was very fascinated by the Red Sea crossing. But then I went and started interviewing people, and they said, well, what's the point of the Red Sea crossing? There's no evidence for the Israelites in Egypt in the first place. I said, wait a minute, what? They said, yeah, there's no evidence for any of this. And I realized that in order to, I guess it's just the way my mind thinks, I like to see things in a sequence and see the pattern. I realized that no matter what kind of film we made about the Red Sea crossing, if there wasn't any evidence for the Israelites or for Joseph in Egypt, that had to be dealt with first. And that's really what ended up happening, is that we had to go back and establish, for myself. As you know, in this film, I actually, when I was investigating it, I had a crisis of faith.
When you and I first met, I had just returned from Egypt. I came to the Christian Booksellers Convention, I believe it was in Atlanta, Georgia. And we met in the lobby there, and you were there for a completely different purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I had been a part of that organization for a long time. I always felt, literally for 40 years, I think that many of us know that we're supposed to do something. And we can either make a decision to kind of pursue it or just to tell ourselves that it's not going to happen. And I always had a sense that I was supposed to make films, and I was supposed to make films about the Bible. I just didn't know what it was. And so for 40 years, I've had this sense of calling on my own life. And for 30 years, I went to this conference. I would take my family vacation, even when I wasn't making films or anything. I just did not want to lose that connection to the possibility. And because of that, and I think this is one thing for a lot of people to know, is that, and you might have experienced this yourself, is that if there's this sort of sense in your life that you're supposed to be doing something, you need to pay attention to that. Because I believe that oftentimes people have a calling in their life, but they talk themselves out of it, or the enemy talks themselves out of it, and they just think, well, I can't do that, or I can't do this. And I believe that there are things that we're supposed to do, that we were created to do. And in this particular case, I kept going to that conference, and that led me, that's when we met, but it was also about that time, around 2000, the year 2000, that I heard about people making a film about this very subject matter, about the Red Sea crossing. And I actually got involved with that to try to help.
I was thrilled when I heard that, because I had just gotten back from the Red Sea crossing site. I just flew back to America, and when I met you, I said, Tim, they found Pharaoh's chariots on the bottom of the Red Sea. I said, I do television. I do, this deserves a real filmmaker to do this. And when I said this to you, your eyes lit up, and because you had already been involved in this, and I had no idea. I just knew that, I had certain abilities in this area, but it's like your whole life you have really, this has been, your calling has been something you have not been able to escape no matter what you've done.
Well, what happens sometimes when people escape from their calling, they get thrown off a ship and a whale comes along. It's not a pretty story. But so I think really, yes, you're correct. And there are certain things that we feel that we're supposed to do. And the challenge, though, and I'll tell you what, is that I thought this would be a one-year project. And I remember sitting in church and after the first year, after I started working on this project, I said, forgive me, I'm a liar. I was talking to the Lord before the service. And I said, I thought this, I promised I'd have this done in a year, and I don't even know what I'm doing. And this project continued to get bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. And I felt this in my heart. It felt like the Lord said, this film will be done when I say it's finished, not when you're tired of working on it. And some things are like that. They're much bigger than we imagine. And then the next thing is, if you make a facade, if you just go ahead and rush something out there, people will surround it and knock it over. But if you build it strong on all sides, when it rises up into the culture, people will attack it, but they won't be able to destroy it. And what I started to realize was that by making films that had multiple viewpoints, they became stronger because it allowed the audience to hear and make a decision. And I oftentimes would say, well, I don't have all the answers. And then I'd pray, and it was like God was saying, well, you don't need to have the answers. You need to have the questions. And so I think, so I would say, well, then give me the questions, help me to know what the questions are. And I've had this experience over the years as I've matured, where I have a sense where I know what's supposed to happen next. And I pray, and it doesn't come all the time. And had I known it would take as long as it was, I probably would have been discouraged. And there were times when I didn't know, and it was very, very difficult. And I think that that's the way it is for a lot of callings. That you're sometimes in a desert, a wilderness experience.
Well, I could relate so much to how you're approaching your film, because in writing The Mystery of Iniquity, I took people down the same journey that I went down, because I knew that if I would take them down that same path, my journey of discovery, that they would be able to discover this with me. And so your filmmaking really went down that same path. You were involved with the Red Sea crossing, I believe it was a Questar production that was done. And so you got to meet Leonard Moeller and some of the actors back then that were promulgating the biblical point of view on this. And that's where your adventure started. It was a faith-building thing for you at that point, wasn't it?
Right. And what happened was that I was at the conference, and I wasn't actually the filmmaker, but some of the people that were on that wanted to try to get it into television. And I, very much like you, and I know that you had your story, as I've heard it, is that when you heard about these things, you thought everybody needs to know about this.
Right.
I felt the same way, and I felt that somebody needed to get this on television. So I volunteered to help take it to the networks and try to get it put on television, and that was my role. I wasn't a filmmaker back then, but it got me so involved and interested that I ended up contacting Leonard Moeller and asking him to, and when I called him, I was explaining something, and all he said was yes. And he kept interrupting me, and he just said yes. And I think he felt that this was something he was supposed to do, and before I could even get to the end of my question, he was agreeing to it. And that sort of started a whole process of me meeting him and so many other people. And what I realized is that in order to tell a story, you have to have a story. And I didn't realize that I was going to become a part of that story.
Yeah.
And you're a part of that story. And so many other people are part of that story. And it's with great, I would want to say, I feel humbled by the fact that there's so much information that as we've been making these films to try to uncover what the truth is. And as we know, as we're going to talk about this, that there's a lot of ideas, traditions, possibly misconceptions that have clouded the stories of the Bible, the narrative of the Bible. And so as we're trying to uncover that, that's what patterns are doing, the whole approach. So it took me a number of years of filming, and we actually have thousands of hours of footage and interviews, and you're sitting on this material as you're trying to figure out, well, what is this? What am I supposed to do with this? And eventually we started to see that there were patterns that would show up. And so my own personal journey, I think, took a lot of maturing for me to understand how to identify the patterns in the Bible. And you could look for certain things. And so when I was told there wasn't any evidence for any of it, that's when we decided to go and start there. And that became the patterns of evidence, the Exodus. And we started to look for those patterns. But what we jumped over, because I knew there's so much content, the patterns of evidence, the Exodus, looks at the existence of Joseph and the early Israelites, everything except the route. And then we jumped to the conquest, and we showed they left this place and they arrived at this place. And then the next film, The Moses Controversy, dealt with the writing, because Moses was writing. And did he have the ability to write? And that became the next part of our journey, because I was wanting to get to the Red Sea miracle, I wanted to get there, but I knew that I had to deal with a few other concerns that people were raising.
Well, this 20 years ago, this actually took you to Egypt, to the crossing site, and also to explore something that you were being told by a professional archaeologist, is that Israel was never in Egypt, or this is part of the fairy tale narrative that the atheists are promulgating. But you had a crisis of faith when you went over there to establish these things, and that was really what touched my heart, is this crisis that you ran into over there.
Yeah, there are things that happen in our lives that we might not tell other people. We might still be going to services or still be kind of going through the motions. But what happens is you have something happens. It could be a setback. It could be something happens in your life personally, or it could be a question that you have. And that causes a seed of doubt to grow in your heart. And when I went to Egypt, and I went to the very location where the Israelites were, I met with Egyptologist Manfred Bitek. And Manfred Bitek, when I asked him, have you found it? I was so excited because it took a lot to get up there. It's a whole other story, but we got up to see him, and he wasn't expecting me. And so I asked him, have you found evidence of the Hebrews? Have you found evidence of the Israelites? I was basically saying. And he said, so far, not. And when he said that, I was so stunned. I could hardly imagine. I didn't know what to say next, because I was so anticipating him to affirm that he was finding evidence, for him, the man who would know, to say that he didn't, because I had heard mixed messages before that he had. And so here I was there. It took a lot of effort to go on the other side of the world to get there. But I didn't say anything to anyone else. But at that time, a seed of doubt started to happen in my heart.
Well, you actually filmed him on location there, and then brought that film back into your editing studio, and that's when you had to face the cold, hard fact.
Yeah. In fact, I was sitting there because oftentimes I was still working commercials and doing a lot of other work. So on the weekends, I would work on these projects. And people wonder, well, why does it take so long? Well, oftentimes you don't have any other resources. You have to do this on the side. And I was sitting there by myself in an edit suite. And as I sat there, I was watching this footage, and I could see him talking, and I watched it over and over, and he was saying they didn't find any evidence. And I started to cry. And I said, Lord, you have to help me understand what's going on here. And then the room felt like it got cold, like there was a chill in the room. And this thought came in from the left side. Everything you have believed, everything your family believes, is a lie. And this sense of horror and terror and utter despair came over me. And almost instantly, another voice on this side said, stop editing. Get up. Go to your office. And I got up, left the room, and I walked across to my office. Go to your bookcase. Was that clear? Read that book. Pulled this book out, and a friend had given me a book by David Rohl. David Rohl is an Egyptologist, and it was called Pharaohs and Kings. And I hadn't read it. I just put it on the bookcase. I got a bookcase full of books. And so I opened it up, and I flipped through it, and there, the very dig site that I had been to with BTEC, that I was looking at in the other room, was being reinterpreted as the place where the Israelites came and had evidence for Joseph and his family and everything. And I said, wow, we need to go. I need to go to England. And that was just this sort of ongoing discovery process. And that, you see, so here I was 20 years ago trying to make the film about the Red Sea miracle, the Red Sea crossing, all of that. And it's taken 20 years of maturing in my own life to get to this place. And this new film is actually, has never been done before, very exciting. It's a 2-part film. It's an epic. It's an epic documentary on the Red Sea miracle. And it takes people on a journey, just as the Israelites did. And we'll talk, I know we're going to talk more about that process of making this film, but so that going to that bookcase and then uncovering that information was one of many, many situations where we found, information that just was overlooked. And then that started a weaving of information that sometimes I get an interview and I wouldn't even know what it was. I didn't know how important that interview was because I didn't know enough about it. Mm-hmm. But it would go in the archives. And then later on I go, wait a minute, he said this, I remember that. And then we would start to put all the pieces together. And that's how these films have been directed.
This is incredible. The pattern of evidence that began to unfold, and now what you're doing in this next one, which is the Red Sea miracle, Manfred Bitek actually comes back into the picture unexpectedly in the land of Israel 20 years later, and a complete reversal happens, and this is so exciting. I want people to take a look at the video. We're going to take a break, and we're going to have just a little trailer here to introduce what you have done here, because this is what we want everyone to get out to the theaters and to bring their friends, their families, their churches, their whole congregations need to come out to this, because you have built a case for the Exodus and to bring us up to the Red Sea that I believe is just an airtight case and couldn't be done without that crisis of faith that you went through.